Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler, and I have my friends on with me today, Scott Ritter, Joe Lombardo, and Kristen Chrisman. And since I've been talking with Joe and Scott and Kristen, my views have jumped right through the roof, and I want everybody to have an opportunity to talk about with you guys to talk about how you got involved and what you do and the importance of it. So I think we'll start with Joe. So Joe, you've been involved with this kind of stuff for a long time, right?
Well, yes, yes. I guess I was kind of born into it because my parents were civil rights activists, labor activists, and socialists. And so they taught me something, I guess. But my political activity, I guess, started in college. It was during the Vietnam War. I helped organize a chapter of something called the Student Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam on my campus. Um, and that was kind of a student or youth organization associated with one of the major coalitions that organized activity against the Vietnam War, which was the National Peace Action Coalition. And for a while, I was a staff person for the National Peace Action Coalition, and did a lot of organizing against the war in Vietnam. I, of course, stayed political and was involved in many different things, but not to the extent that I was then or I am now, because I was raising children and doing other things like that. But then when the Iraq War came along, I had to get involved, and I helped organize here in my hometown of Bethlehem, New York, Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, which is an organization that is still going, which holds weekly peace vigils and monthly forums at our local public library, and is involved in a whole slew of other activity. So that's pretty much my history. Why I became an activist is just because I believe I was raised by compassionate parents that taught me that we don't want to hurt people. We want to work together collectively. And when I see all the poverty and um, anger and war that's going on in the world, it moves me to act. So I guess that's my history.
So I vaguely remember you from the Occupy Wall Street when we would meet down in the park. But I believe you did the demonstrations with Maureen Ahmad and her husband in the city during the Iraq War, right?
Yeah, Maureen and I and another person uh, kind of tried to go around to the different communities and talk about the war in Iraq. And we we went to some good places and some strange places. We got kicked out of some places, but we were in back rooms of bars and town halls and parks and schools and anywhere that would allow us to speak. And we did, and tried to build a movement against the war in Iraq.
Now, I don't know if you were there the night that Ray, Maureen, and I were kicked out of the mechanical library. Were you
Yes, I
there?
was there. I was right. I was one of the people that was there.
Okay. So your involvement in politics and anti-war goes back 50 years, right?
A long time.
Right. Do you feel optimistic, or do you have days when you feel totally pessimistic?
Well, the only way you could continue doing this is if you do have some optimism. And I do. I basically think people are good and people don't want war. And what stands in the way of that, of course, is they have all the resources, the government and uh, the corporations that control the media. And we're seeing that very clearly now with the high level of censorship and propaganda that we're seeing in the US media. They also have all the money. They also have the two political parties. They also have the police and the courts and the military. So they control an awful lot. What we have is that all of those policies are against the interest of the vast majority of people in the country. I was just listening to a video where various people are speaking on MSNBC and CNN about getting more weapons to Ukraine, and then on this video, underneath each one, it gave a little label of their where they're from, and they are all from these weapon manufacturers, which are making tremendous amounts of money. So the war might be in their interest, but it is not in our interest, and it brings people perhaps to World War III, which would be disastrous. And many people are dying while we have inflation and unemployment, and an economy that's tanking. This is not in our interest, and I think people, by and large, are peaceful, don't want to see war. So, although they have all the resources, and what we have is that the interest of the vast majority of people is not to have these wars, and therefore we have the potential of organizing that vast majority. And as we've seen over and over again throughout this world, when the vast majority gets together and works in concert and is well organized, there's no power that could stop them. We could bring this country to a halt just if we all put our hands in our pockets and refuse to go to work. So we
Mhm.
ultimately have the power. Now, how to make that power manifest is our problem. But it's because of that, and because I understand that people are interested in peace and are good people, that I do have optimism and continue to have optimism.
So, Kristen, you've been involved in peace and anti-war for a number of years, right?
Yeah, I had just started graduate school when in 1990 when the Persian Gulf War started. And for me, that changed everything. I became severely depressed and I just wanted to die, actually. I, I marched in a march there and sent an angry letter to the president, but um, I just felt powerless and just so enraged that how could bombs dropping on Baghdad help anything? It seems so wrong and unjust. But my housemate encouraged me to continue at least for the year, even though I decided to not pursue the PhD program anymore because it just seemed irrelevant to me at that point. But during that year, for some reason, I had a lot of leisure time. So for the first time, other than summer vacations, I began to read leisurely books of my own choice at my own pace, not just absorbing it for a test or something. And for the first time, I began reading material critically, meaning looking for the logic. Does this sentence lead to that sentence? Is the author leaping in logic? Is he making assumptions? And it became like a passion for me to read that way. And that's how I read ever since. And incidentally, this is a little aside. That's why I get really enraged when these US experts interpret Putin's essay from last year, 2021, and his 2007 Munich speech. They interpret it as proving or indicating his desires for empire. And I see no proof, no indication, no clue of that at all. It's just an awful interpretation. And I think I'm very good at interpreting things. It just enrages me because it's dangerous what they're doing. They're fomenting hatred against Russia and very much against Putin. But back to my history. So I left that graduate program after the year and I became a secretary and I worked at various jobs like that for several years. But then I enrolled in another public graduate program in public administration. And that's where you learn how to manage governmental organizations. And that program was really relevant, especially the courses in decision making and organizational behavior, cultural analysis of organizations, and negotiation. And I wrote this giant paper there about Angola, about the civil war there that the US, of course, had taken sides in, as it always does. It takes sides and sends weapons and funds to one side. So I wrote about that, but I also wrote about the controversy within the US government that you don't read about in the papers. And I looked at the decision-making processes, which were horrible. I mean, I saw no evidence of analysis of the roots of violence. It was nothing. It was, so I learned a lot from that paper. And then after that, I became a mother, and I had my children and homeschooled them. In fact, I raised them speaking Russian and Spanish because I'd had a degree in Russian before graduate school. And that was really important too, because you learn a lot about the importance of love and play and joy and self-esteem, all these things that are absent from foreign policymaker discussions, absent when they drop the bombs. You know, they don't think about those things. And then the next big thing for me was 9/11. And when that happened, I was frightened by 9/11, but I was enraged by Bush Jr.'s response. And I had a little red, white, and blue ribbon thing out in my mailbox. But the day the US started bombing Afghanistan, I just ran out and tore it off and threw it in the garbage. I was disgusted. It's so unjust to drop bombs on Afghanistan. It didn't make sense. It was pointless. It wouldn't solve any problem. And then I began reading more, and I learned about Dennis Kucinich, the congressman. And I learned about his proposal for a US Department of Peace. So I got a hold of the bill, read it. I thought, wow, this is inspiring stuff, not like all the other stuff we read about. But I thought, you know, with my always critical mind, I thought, well, but I'd organize the department a little differently, I thought, because I thought there was a little bit of overlap in some of the branches and some things that were lost in the cracks. So I remember during my son's nap time, they were sleeping on either side of me, and I was like drawing shapes and scribbles and figuring out how would I organize the department. And it led into this model I created called Paradigm for Peace, which is really a model for analyzing the roots of violence, the escalators of violence. I call them 3 facets of solutions. Instead of having this narrow answer to conflict of weapons, drones, weapon shipments, boots on the ground, sanctions, threats, instead of that, we have all these other solutions. And they're the ones, when you lay out all the roots and escalators of violence, you find that barely a single one, if anyone, can be remedied by violence and sanctions and threats, or can even be alleviated by that. So all these other solutions are what hit the nail on the head as far as connecting a solution to a problem. So I developed this model, and I wrote a strategic plan for the US Department of Peace and a validation for the department. And then I sent it all off to Dennis Kucinich. And when he got it, which was 2 months later, because the mail was really slow then after 9/11, he called me that day to thank me. And it was just such a nice boost for me. I really needed that boost. But he's a real nice person. He'll call people and talk to people. And then for the next, ever since, almost every day, I've been working on researching and writing and applying that model to the Mideast US conflicts. But I also ran the model through some other conflicts like the Cold War, the US Civil War, Nazi Germany, and I look at Latin America. In fact, I just ran it through the current conflict in a kind of a condensed way, and I'm going to put that on my YouTube channel, because I wrote this multi-volume series I was hoping it would be for college students about foreign policy and peace, but honestly, I don't think it's ever going to get published. It's no one in this country has expressed interest in it, but at least I'm putting the ideas out there here and on the YouTube channel. And I want to say one more thing, as far as when the Iraq War came about, the impending Iraq War, I was enraged. I was still enraged about Afghanistan, but I sent out this rationale against it, this multi-page packet to everybody I knew, which was like 100 people or something. Anybody I'd ever known who I could get their address, and inviting them to participate in a cooperative, I called it a cooperative quest dialogue, but I didn't get too much response out of that. So then I asked one of my best friends, Sandy, if she could do a cooperative quest dialogue with me over email, because I knew she and I had different views. And so she agreed, and we talked about like the guidelines of this dialogue, which is where, unlike a debate where you win by beating the other person, in the cooperative dialogue, you win by learning more. You both get more access to truth, your understanding grows, and your friendship grows. And so it was great. For weeks we participated in this dialogue, and that really became a basis for my work too, the ideas I learned from her, and from the dialogue. But that's been my work in peace.
So, how long have you been doing writings, and where have you submitted your writings to? And how successful have you been in getting them published?
Well, right after 9/11, I was hoping to speak at the library, but they, perhaps like your experiences, they weren't interested unless there was somebody else presenting the other point of view, they said, which was kind of strange because my whole approach was to look at different points of view. But so I didn't have success there. I did get some essays published on a website shortly after 9/11, but then trying to get articles in magazines was impossible for me. I did speak at a couple small piece things, and I spoke at Maureen invited me to speak at the Kateri Tekakwitha conference. That was great. And I presented my model to two college interns at Senator Gillibrand's office, and they really liked it. They said, "Wow, I can see this as a college course, but it doesn't affect Congress when you make that presentation." And but then I finally was able to get op-eds accepted at the Times Union for several years until now. And but I've tried very, very hard different times, and I keep reorganizing my work because the publishers always want things short. But it's been very unsuccessful as far as I've tried Canadian and British and American publishers, but I'll probably try some other country.
Scott, how did you get started with your truthfulness?
Well, the implication of that question is at one point in time, maybe I wasn't telling the truth.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way.
I know. But it's Joe grew up in an environment of peace and activism. I grew up the child of a career military family during the Cold War. I cut my teeth on patriotism, old school patriotism. I mean, when I went to bed at night, I had John F. Kennedy, a poster of John F. Kennedy asking not what your country can do, but what you can do for your country.
Right.
And then I also had the U.S. Code of Conduct. I am an American fighting man, and then the code. And that, I grew. This was my life. I went to high school in Hawaii during the Vietnam War. We took in a Vietnamese refugee family after the fall of Saigon. My father was heavily involved he did 2 tours in Vietnam during the war, and then he did, Vietnamization. So he's always over in Vietnam, overseeing that. I remember that to be a very difficult time for him because he was embittered by what he saw. Didn't get into it too much because very patriotic man was doing his duty. We went to Turkey, front line of the Cold War, and then we ended up in Germany. I graduated from Germany, Kaiserslautern American High School in 1979. And I immediately went and joined the military because, people can joke about it today, but kill a commie for mommy, better dead than red. That was in my DNA. I mean, my whole life focused on getting out of high school, joining the military so I could be on the front line to kill the Soviet invader when they crossed into Western Germany. I was willing to die for cause of freedom. People can roll their eyes at that. Real as it gets, and it's in me today. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not anti-war. I'm as pro-war as you can get if it's fought under the right circumstances. I believe in dealing as much death and destruction to the enemy as possible. I don't believe in a fair fight. I believe if we go to war, we kill them more than they kill us. We bring this conflict to an immediate termination. But I've learned over time that war has to be the last possible option. In fact, it should never be an option because it's so horrible. It's so utterly horrible. But it took me a while to learn that. I went to college. I studied Russian history because Sun Tzu, got to know your enemy. So I learned my enemy. I learned the language. I learned the culture. Then I spent 2.5 years learning to kill them in field artillery, which is very relevant with what's going on in Ukraine today. I helped perfect drone technology, using drones to target, the counter battery technology they speak of. I was one of the guys who helped bring that into fruition in modern times. And then my Russian history background caught up with me, and I ended up going to the Soviet Union to implement the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty after Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed it. And this was not just an important thing for disarmament. I mean, it was an important thing for me because literally, when you prepare to fight somebody, to kill somebody, you have to dehumanize them. You can't view them as human beings. You view them as objects, and you learn to hate them. And I had never met a Soviet in my life, and I hated them because I was ready to kill them. And then they sent me over there, and I had to live with them for 2 years. And I learned to like them. I learned to love them. I learned to respect them. I learned to appreciate them. Last thing I wanted to do is kill them. All I wanted to do is work with them on finding ways that our two countries could cooperate peacefully. And I thought that was a hugely transformative moment for me. Then that job came to an end, and I went back to the Marine Corps, and I got caught up in the Gulf War, in the business of killing. And I was an active participant in that conflict, heavily involved in counter Scud operations, targeting things and bringing death and destruction to the enemy, which is fine. It was war. And it was a war fought under Chapter 7 of the United States Security Council. It was a lawful war. People can disagree with the war all they want. They can't say that we didn't have legal authority to wage that war. We did. But then I went to Iraq as a weapons inspector afterwards. And again, everybody's familiar with my weapons inspection background. But the same thing. I went from a wartime mindset where the Iraqis were dehumanized. They were objects. I didn't cry at all killing them. And now I'm living with them, living with the guys that I was bombing. And one of the amazing things is I was heavily involved in counter Scud operations. I investigated the Iraqi Scud missile force. I ended up sitting down around dinner tables and tables with the generals and the colonels and the lieutenant colonels and the majors and the captains who I fought during the war, and having just a conversation, not only about the war, but about life. These were humans. And the thing that came out of 7 years of doing this job wasn't just, the importance of disarmament, but the humanity of the Iraqi people and how important it was that we get this thing right, and how wrong it was for the United States to use economic sanctions as a vehicle without giving the Iraqis an off-ramp. The off-ramp was disarmament, and the more the Iraqis tried to disarm, the less the United States wanted to allow them to disarm. And I became very discouraged by this. And that's why when I resigned from that position, started speaking out against policy, it was a difficult thing for me to do, because now it meant speaking out against American government policy, and I was the guy who used to implement it. And then as we came closer and closer to war, the last thing I wanted was to go to war with Iraq. Not because if Saddam posed a threat to the United States worthy of war, I'd be right there saying, bomb. I'd be volunteering to go back in. But I realized that this was a war being fought under false pretense, that instead of rushing to war, we should be rushing to stop a war. We should be rushing to prevent a war. And I've been doing that ever since. And I got to meet some wonderful people like Joe. Like now I'm meeting Kristen. I got to meet you, Maureen Oman. I got to meet Dennis Kucinich. I'm good friends with Dennis. I got to meet a whole bunch of people. I led a march down the streets of London with George Galloway at the head of over 1 million people. I mean, Scott Ritter, United States Marine Corps, hoorah, Mr. War. And I'm marching with George Galloway in the cause of peace. I mean, look, I'm still learning this business. I'm not your traditional peace activist. I don't tend to be. I'm somebody who mastered the art of war. I'm somebody who, is trying to master the art of peace. And I wish I could find a way that made peace make as much sense to people as war seems to make sense to people, because peace is so much more, it's just such a better option. War, like I said, should be the last option. We should exhaust all possible options other than war before you even consider going to war. And unfortunately, it takes people experiencing war firsthand to understand exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, I remember seeing you in the early 2000s. I had mentioned to you, I saw you on the Phil Donahue show, and then you weren't there anymore. You just weren't there. And you were calling these people out, and you became a persona non grata. And, then I had found out you lived in Delmar, and I friended you on Facebook. But when you see and you hear all the falsehoods that is being said today, and the fact that on YouTube you are the king of the world. Everybody loves to hear your videos. Everybody loves to hear, what you have to say. When you hear so many falsehoods, how do you feel about that?
Look, let's put on my serious hat for a minute. It could be the cause of the greatest source of depression a human being could go through. Um, I mean, if I sat there and just thought about it long enough, I'd tune out of the world. I'd be so depressed, um, because ignorance is the antithesis of what humanity's supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about, accumulating knowledge, empowering ourselves with information, becoming better people. Ignorance tends to be generated from fear, and fear is generated from the lack of knowledge. And I, when you see these falsehoods, you just realize you're confronted with a wall of ignorance and knowledge. Because one of the reasons why I like doing things like this is to try and encourage debate, discussion, dialogue, to empower people with knowledge and information, have them look at problems from a different point of view, maybe come up with creative solutions to problems that previously had no solution. But the people that are buying into these falsehoods don't seem to want to engage in that process. They've just gone straight to Z, buying into the lie. And there's literally nothing that I have been able to find that can get through to them. And this is a source of immense depression. I keep doing things like this. I'm glad to be here today. I'm proud to be, with Joe and Kristen. But if I think about it too long, I realize that, this is an uphill struggle. I mean, I'll keep going for it. I'll keep trying it, but man, it does get depressing after a while. I mean, I'm going to put a smile on my face so I don't totally, psych myself out. But no, if you think about it too long, I mean, look, I went into a huge depression after the Gulf War because I tried everything in my power to stop that war, stop the second Iraq War, everything in my power. I bankrupted my family. I laid it all on the line in the cause of peace. I put myself out there in a way that I never would have imagined putting myself out there because I was armed with the information. There was no one in the world who knew more about Iraqi WMD than me and Saddam Hussein. And Saddam wasn't about to speak up in defense of himself, so I did it. But I was called a shill for Saddam. I was called, anti-American, when all I was trying to do is put the truth on the table so people could make an educated decision about an issue that had Americans going to war, where thousands of Americans got killed, tens of thousands of Americans got wounded, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis lost their lives, and millions of people's lives were ruined because of war based on a lie. And if I think about that too much, I get horribly depressed. So I'm going to put on my fake smile right now. It's not a fake smile; it's a real smile. But I got to try and have a little bit of sense of humor here, even though it's tough, because otherwise I just go into a deep, dark depression, and I don't want to be there.
Well, I hate to end on this note. You guys have been wonderful, and we're just about out of time. And Joe, I gotta say, good luck on your trip. It's gonna be really a good trip, and I hope that you'll be able to do Zooms from Europe and enlighten us as to what's going on. Christian, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott, and thank you everybody for listening. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, um, Issues That Matter with Cynthia. Please like it and please keep the comments going. Thank you, everybody. You have a wonderful day and thanks. Bye.